My name is Allison. I'm 34 years old, currently living in Seattle, working remotely as a corporate emotional intelligence consultant. You might think my life sounds fairly ordinary, but at my sister's wedding, right there in the grand ballroom lit by glittering chandeliers and warm applause, I was asked to leave the table because I didn't bring a gift envelope. My sister Jessica leaned in and whispered, "Did you not bring any money? Then maybe go outside and get yourself some French fries." As I stood up, the entire room fell silent. But right then, a man suddenly stood and pointed at me. "Allison Carter? Is that really you?" he said loudly. And from that moment on, nothing was ever the same. Have you ever been humiliated by your own family just because they didn't think you were worth anything? If this story stirs something inside you, leave a comment below. Hit like if you believe dignity should never be measured by how much you spend. And don't forget to subscribe, because what I'm about to share, you won't be able to look away from. I remember those childhood years so clearly. The afternoons I would sit silently in the backyard, my back against the old maple tree, listening to the wind rustling through the leaves, my eyes fixed on the kitchen window where my mother and Jessica would often laugh together. I didn't feel jealous. I didn't cry. I just detached. From a very young age, I knew I was different. I could sense other people's emotions. Not in the usual empathetic way. I truly felt the things they didn't say, the quiet sorrow behind someone's eyes, the muted anger beneath a forced smile. Once when I was just 8, I took my mom's hand as she came home from work and quietly said, "Don't be sad because your boss yelled at you today. You didn't do anything wrong." She froze for a second, then pulled her hand away. "Who told you that?" she asked, clearly unsettled. I shook my head. No. After that day, the way she looked at me changed. My dad started calling me that weird kid whenever he passed by my room. Over time, their curiosity turned into discomfort. Then avoidance. Every year I got older, they pulled further away. Jessica, my younger sister, on the other hand, was like a beam of sunlight in that cold house. She had bright eyes, a dazzling smile, and that magnetic presence everyone was drawn to. No wonder my parents favored her. At dinner, Jessica always got the tastiest bites, the questions about school, the morning hugs. Me. As long as I sat there quietly and didn't cause trouble, that was good enough. I once tried telling my teacher that something felt off when one of my classmates laughed but had an overwhelming sadness in her eyes. I warned a friend not to go near a man on campus because he made my skin crawl. No one believed me. They said I was being dramatic, too influenced by movies. One time, my school called home, urging my mom to come in for an emergency meeting. They said I needed psychological evaluation. My mom didn't ask if I was okay. She just sighed and said, "You wear me out, Allison. Why can't you just be normal?" So I learned to stay quiet. Every time I sensed something, like a tiny crack in someone's smile, or that suffocating tension when Dad walked through the door, I swallowed it. I stopped sharing. Stopped warning. I knew no one would listen. I became a ghost in my own home. As Jessica grew, she only shone brighter. She got straight A's, led every class, and was picked as class president year after year. I struggled through exams, my head clouded with emotions that weren't mine. Some days I'd walk into school feeling like the weight of the world was on my shoulders, like I'd absorbed some deep sadness or fear from someone nearby. I was exhausted, but I had no one to tell. Once in 6th grade, Dad took me to a psychologist. The man stared at me, scribbled notes, occasionally asked a few curt questions. "Do you hear voices in your head?" I shook my head. "Have you ever wanted to hurt yourself?" Another shake. At the end of the session, he told my parents, "She has an overactive imagination. It needs to be redirected." So they enrolled me in piano, painting, yoga, everything imaginable. No one asked me what I wanted. I just wanted to be believed. In high school, I slowly taught myself how to disconnect. I practiced making eye contact without getting emotionally overwhelmed. I built a shell: go to school, come home, avoid interaction, avoid attachment. But the cost was loneliness so sharp it ached. On holidays, Jessica had birthday parties, cakes, friends. My birthday was just Dad muttering, "Don't make a fuss. Jessica has exams." Mom would say, "Don't expect much. You're not like other kids." Just once I pushed back. I was 16. Jessica had been chosen for the Miss Teen pageant at school. That day, I sensed something dark from the event organizer, a teacher who had past complaints filed against him. I warned Mom and Jessica not to let her go backstage alone. I said something felt wrong. Mom laughed. Allison, you're making stuff up again. Jessica smirked. Jealous, huh? Because you'll never be pretty enough for the stage. I went quiet. And just like I felt after the pageant, another girl came forward to say the teacher had harassed her in the waiting room. Jessica was lucky. Mom had stepped in just in time. But no one mentioned my warning. No one said thank you. They just said, good thing it wasn't you. I became invisible in my own family. When Jessica came of age, she was sent to an expensive private school, got her own car, a bank account set up by our parents. I worked part-time at the public library, saving pennies to buy textbooks. But I never held a grudge. Because I knew, if I let myself carry resentment, I'd be flooded with all those dark emotions. And I wouldn't be able to tell what was mine, and what wasn't. So I meditated. I wrote. I documented every feeling. Mornings waking up to emptiness, nights hearing laughter from Jessica's room. I turned them into data. Into skill. I learned how to read people without being swallowed by them. I lived in the shadows, but I didn't let them consume me. And in that quiet space, I began preparing for something bigger. A path my family could never imagine. I never guessed that this shadow I was forced to live in would one day become the light that exposed the truth my family spent years avoiding. And it all began with the very gift they once mocked as a little mental quirk. I still remember it clearly. It was a chilly March afternoon. The wind crept through every window frame, though the sun was already casting golden light across the backyard. I had just finished my first class of the spring semester, reading quietly in my room when Mom knocked once, then entered without waiting. Jessica has something exciting to share, she said, her eyes glowing with pride like Jessica had just won Miss America. Jessica followed her in tight dress, subtle makeup, holding a glossy folder. I've been offered to be the new face of a media company, she announced like she was on a press tour. They said I have a cinematic presence. Major magazine potential. I smiled politely. Can you tell me more about it? You wouldn't understand, Allison, Jessica shrugged, handing the folder to Mom without even glancing at me. They're launching a luxury cosmetics campaign. I just need to sign a 1-year representation deal. Comes with a salary. They even promised to send me to a casting in Los Angeles. I took the folder after Mom skimmed it, scanning the terms. I didn't fully grasp the legal language, but one section made my stomach turn cold. Image training program fee, $2,500. First-year management fee, $1,800. Digital portfolio fee, $900. All up front. All required before any official agreement. I looked up. You haven't signed anything yet, right? She rolled her eyes. Here we go again. You're always suspicious. It's not suspicion. It's a bad feeling. If they truly believed in you, why are they asking you to pay first? Jessica folded her arms. You don't understand how the industry works. It's about investing in your image. And that means studios, trainers, experts. And experts cost money. I swallowed hard, guilt rising in my chest as the air around my sister thickened. She didn't know it, but I could clearly feel the dishonesty radiating from the company trying to lure her in. You just need to wait a few days, I said gently. Let me ask some of my friends in the media industry. I'm not stopping you, I just want to make sure you're not being scammed. Jessica laughed. You're jealous, aren't you? Because no one's ever looked at you the way they look at me. You've lived in the shadows for so long that even the tiniest bit of light makes you uncomfortable. I was stunned into silence. Mom stood nearby, glanced at me, then softly said, as if defending Jessica, Allison, let her give it a try. Don't always assume the worst. You should learn to trust people more. I held the contract in my hands, turned it over, and ran my fingers along the cold ink. There was a dull ache in my chest, not fear but that familiar feeling of helplessness. I'd felt it before when Mom refused to believe me about the robbery years ago. When 3 doctors told me I was just imagining things. When school labeled me emotionally unstable. And now, right here in my own home, I was being called negative for trying to protect my sister. 3 days later, I got a message from Mom. Jessica just transferred almost $5,000 to that company. They promised to send a shoot schedule next week. I typed almost instinctively, Mom, please don't let her send more money. They don't have a valid business license in the state of Washington. I just looked up the company. They've already been sued in 3 other states. No reply. That evening, I went home to talk in person, but the moment I walked in, Jessica was sitting on the couch, face pale, eyes filled with tears. Mom was next to her, holding her shoulders. She's been scammed, Mom said, looking at me with a mix of blame and sadness. I stepped closer. I'm sorry. I tried. Jessica looked up, her voice sharp. It's your fault. You're the one who brings bad luck to everything. You always carry that negative energy. You saw something again, didn't you? Why didn't you say anything sooner? I froze. I did say something, Jessica. I warned you from the beginning. Dad stepped out of the kitchen, staring straight at me. You shouldn't bring that darkness into this house. Always with your feelings and premonitions. Things fall apart the moment you walk in. I tried to keep my voice steady. Dad, no one caused this except the scammers. You're blaming the wrong person. He shook his head and sighed. Everything started going downhill when you came back from college. Maybe it's karma or something we can't explain, but clearly, you don't bring anything good with you. I looked at the 3 of them, my sister sobbing, my mother silent, and my father looking at me as if I were a cold wind snuffing out the family's warmth. My heart felt like it had shrunk one size smaller. I turned and went up to my room. The old walls were peeling, the paint cracked, but this was still the only space that offered me a sliver of peace. I sat down, opened my laptop, and logged into a forum for people like me, those who could sense emotions and psychological shifts. I typed a question: how do you keep your heart from breaking when your own family calls you a curse? A member named Grey Sage replied, no one can soothe the darkness inside themselves by dumping it on someone else. You're not the shadow. You just haven't been seen in the right light yet. I cried silently. Because a stranger could see me with trust and warmth, while my own family saw only a misplaced figure in the wrong story. And I knew, from that moment on, the fracture in my family would never fully heal. But I also began to understand that not all cracks mean collapse. Some are the places where light begins to shine through. I registered for the seminar because of a headline that popped up on my screen: The Psychology of Silence, when intuition isn't superstition. Maybe if I hadn't clicked that link, everything in my life would have turned out differently. The seminar was held on the 3rd floor of a community library downtown. Simple wooden chairs arranged in rows, soft yellow lighting poured from the old ceiling above. I sat in the second to last row, an old habit, always avoiding attention. The session began with the calm voice of an older woman, her long silver hair tied loosely behind her neck, wearing a velvet burgundy blouse. She stepped onto the stage without notes or slides, just her presence enough to quiet the entire room. My name is Caroline Sanders, she said with a soft smile. I used to be a professor of emotional psychology at Stanford, and I was once forced to resign for writing a paper on things the scientific world calls immeasurable. The audience chuckled gently, and so did she. They were right. I can't measure intuition, but I can show you how it works, and how to live with it without drowning in it. I sat up straighter. A strange sensation washed over me, like when I was near someone who had a sense like mine. An invisible rhythm reaching out to me. Caroline began to share stories from her younger years, when she realized she could feel others' emotional chaos just from the way they entered a room. She spoke of clients who walked into her office with perfect smiles while their minds were swamps of panic and despair. Intuition isn't magic, she said. It's a forgotten sensory organ. Just like skin feels heat or cold, intuition feels the psychological state of the room. After the talk, I stayed behind. My heart was still full of things I couldn't name. I only meant to thank her for giving voice to what I had always felt but never dared to say. But before I could speak, Caroline looked at me, nodded slightly, and said, I knew you'd come. I paused. You recognized me? No need to see. I felt your energy the moment you stepped through the door. It's unmistakable. But you still haven't learned how to live with it without pain. We sat down at a small cafe nearby. Caroline ordered black tea. I just asked for water. I told her about the nights I lay awake listening to my heart beat next to emotions that weren't mine. About walking past strangers and suddenly tearing up for reasons I couldn't explain. About my sister, my family, and the isolation I'd locked myself in, just to avoid disturbing others. Caroline listened like she could hear the things I didn't even say aloud. Your ability is a gift, she told me. But without training, it becomes a burden. You've been living like a sponge soaking up everyone's pain. It's time to learn how to return that pain to where it belongs. And so, Caroline began to teach me. Not in a classroom. Not with textbooks. She brought me along to private meetings with executives, panicked business owners, leaders baffled by the disconnect in their teams. Caroline never asked, "Are you stressed?" She just sat there, watched someone walk in, and asked, "Do you ever dream you're standing in front of a crowd but can't speak a word?" And the former Marine Turnso would nod, lips trembling. I learned to observe unfocused eyes, restless fingers fiddling with shirt buttons, to listen not just with my ears but with my entire body. Caroline told me, "Don't try to understand people with your head. Your heart knows them long before you do. Trust that feeling." I started consulting for small businesses, work teams in conflict, departments adrift after restructuring. I never introduced myself as a psychologist. I simply said, "I listen to your team and help reconnect the human flow." The results came so quickly I could hardly believe it. A coffee shop with 6 months of losses turned things around just 3 weeks after I had a brief one-on-one with their manager. Just one conversation asking about his deepest fear. A small tech company in Tacoma nearly sold itself to a giant, but after a session with me, chose to keep its identity, and later became the fastest-growing startup in the county. Caroline warned me never to take all the credit. They must be the ones to walk forward. You're just the one placing a small lantern in the dark. I chose to work anonymously. No real name, no photo on any website. I used the alias Gray Fox, a name Caroline once teased me with. "You've got eyes like a fox but sadness like a gray sky." I still lived in the small room behind my parents' old house. I paid the electricity, the water, even covered part of Mom's medication. All under Jessica's name. I didn't need them to know. I just needed the silence to keep doing the work I knew I was born for. I was no longer afraid of my ability. I looked at it head-on and saw it wasn't a curse. It was a map guiding me in the right direction. And with Caroline by my side, I no longer felt alone in this world. I began looking forward, fully, strongly, and not from the shadows. I quietly started my consulting work remotely. No office, no signboard, no nameplate. Just an old laptop, a thick notebook full of handwritten pages, and the name Gray Fox. A name that slowly became the cloak over my true self. Under that name, I sent out hundreds of strategic reports, supporting companies across industries, from restaurant chains barely surviving post-pandemic to industrial design firms paralyzed by internal power struggles over equity shares. No one knew my real name, and I liked it that way. I didn't need the spotlight. I just needed to work in a way that felt right. Jessica, on the other hand, was the opposite. She moved to New York right after graduation and landed a legal assistant job at a big law firm. On her first day, she FaceTimed home, showing off the sleek glass office decorated in minimal modern style. "See that?" she beamed at Mom. "Your girl made it to Manhattan." I was making tea in the kitchen when I heard Mom's voice from the living room. "So proud of you, sweetheart. Just seeing your office makes my heart swell. And your sister, staying home all day, who knows if she's even really working?" Jessica burst out laughing. "She's probably writing some random blog post somewhere. Or watching movies. Don't worry, Mom, I've got everything covered now." I set the tea down, wiped my hands on a towel, and quietly went upstairs. No one noticed I was the one paying the electric bill each month. No one remembered that just last month, I had quietly wired $2,000 for Dad to cover the hospital bill when Mom had a sudden spike in blood pressure. Every contribution I made through a shared account named Carter Family Reserve. An account I created, registered under my parents' names but managed entirely by me. No invoices, no receipts. I chose that path to avoid more tension. To avoid hearing things like, "You're going overboard again." One week the roof started leaking. Every time it rained, the kitchen floor would flood. I called a contractor, paid for the repairs myself, and emailed the invoice to Dad just so he wouldn't feel the shame of borrowing money from neighbors. But after everything was done, Jessica called home on Zoom and Mom panned the phone across the house. "Look, sweetie, thanks to you sending money for the repairs, we're no longer worrying about leaks." I stood on the stairs, hearing every word. No one looked my way. No one mentioned me. Dad sat quietly in the corner, nodding slowly. I stayed silent. I had learned how to survive in silence. But sometimes silence feels like an open wound. It doesn't scream in pain, but it throbs constantly, seeping into every breath. Jessica posted weekly on social media. Morning coffees on Wall Street, rooftop dinners, designer coats, polished leather shoes. Under every post were comments from mom and distant aunts. So proud of you, our beautiful daughter. Sharp eyes, high forehead, just like a girl from a high-class family. Me. Still the name that never got mentioned. One evening, while drafting a report for a furniture company in Texas, Dad knocked on my door. Allison, how much money do you still have in your account? I looked up, not answering right away. He'd never asked me that before, not even during the worst times. I typed back, why, Dad? He sighed and sat on the edge of my bed. This house, your mother's health is failing and my pension isn't much. Jessica's still trying to get her career settled. Maybe you can send a bit more money for the next few months. I looked at him. Part of me wanted to laugh. That tone, the way he spoke of Jessica like a fresh graduate, even though she lived in a luxury apartment in New York with a monthly salary of nearly $8,000. But I nodded. Sure. I'll take care of it. I didn't say that I had just signed a contract with a major corporation in Chicago, and 3 months of that work alone would be enough to keep this house running for a year. They were going through restructuring and needed someone who could recognize the emotional dynamics between departments to keep the team intact. I had outlined 3 strategic options, including projections based on behavioral psychology, and their CEO called me a living map of human insight. But at home I was still the dreamy daughter. Jessica came home for Thanksgiving every year. She always brought expensive gifts and a fresh story about my boss considering me for a project manager role. Every dinner turned into a mini showcase, and Mom was her most loyal fan. Allison, watch and learn from your sister, Mom would say, eyes warm but voice sharp. Same parents, but look how far she's gone. And you still hold up in that little room, aren't you tired? Jessica would giggle sweetly. Mom, Allison likes being alone. Besides, she's still, what is it again? Oh right, consulting with corporate spirits. Her tone wasn't cruel, but it was enough to make me freeze. I took a sip of water, silent. I thought I'd grown used to being unrecognized. But the truth is, no one ever gets used to being dismissed. We just get better at hiding the hurt. That evening, I took a walk alone around our old neighborhood. The wind rustled the oak trees, and I remembered what Caroline once said, not everyone deserves to know your truth. But sooner or later, the truth finds its way into the light. I didn't need my family to understand me. But I knew eventually they would have to face the real me. Not the dreamer, not the quiet sister, not the faded shadow passing the dinner table. But the one who had quietly kept this roof from caving in for years. And when that moment came, the light wouldn't hide anymore. It would show itself, clear, certain, and without introduction. Just as I set my teacup down on the table, my phone buzzed. It was Mom. A surprise video call in the middle of the day as I was still editing an emotional response analysis for a team in California. I answered, keeping my tone calm as usual. Mom appeared on screen, glowing with excitement like she'd just hit the lottery. Next to her, Jessica sat cross-legged, holding up something small and shiny. Can you see it? Mom exclaimed. An engagement ring. Your sister's getting married. I looked at the giant diamond sparkling like glass that Jessica twirled in front of the camera, then shifted my gaze to her face. It wasn't joy. It wasn't love. It was a smugness laced with something almost forced. Congratulations, I said softly. Who's the lucky guy? Jessica tilted her head, her smile opening like she was letting slip a royal secret. Ethan Ward. Sound familiar? He's the son of Ward Global's chairman. He's the official heir, set to take over as CEO in 2 years. Mom jumped in. That's the grandson of the Ward family, honey. One of the most powerful names in telecom. Our family is truly blessed now. I gently placed my hand on the table. In that moment, a strange chill crept down my spine. I had never met Ethan Ward, never heard his voice, never sensed any emotional resonance from him. But from his name alone, I felt something off, like a thick shadow, dust coating a long-forgotten trinket, beautiful but suffocating. It wasn't coming from the ring, from Jessica, or from my mother. It came from that name. Ethan Ward. I said nothing more. I knew that saying anything now would only make things worse. They kept talking about the wedding, how it would be held at a 4-star hotel in Lakewood, how the guest list included media, business partners, and branch executives. Mom even stated, as if it were already settled, After the wedding, I'll give this house to you and Ethan. Your dad and I will move in with you two for a while. It'll be perfect. I couldn't help but sigh quietly. A few days later, the family held a small dinner to introduce Ethan. I hadn't planned on going, but my mother called repeatedly. He's going to be your brother-in-law. As the older sister, you should give your blessing. But remember, stay quiet, don't do anything strange. No one wants bad luck before a wedding. I showed up. Not because I was invited. Not because I felt obligated. But because of that feeling, that unnamed shadow lingering in the air. Ethan looked exactly like a future CEO should. Tailored gray suit, expensive silver watch, clean-shaven face, smiling eyes, a deep warm voice. He shook hands with everyone, spoke to my father with the confident tone of a man who knew his worth. But when it came to me, Ethan paused. His eyes lingered on me for exactly 2 seconds. Just 2, but enough to make the air around me feel heavier. Allison, right? He said, extending his hand but not quite touching mine. I shook it lightly, trying to hide the tingling in my palm. Yes. Jessica's told me a lot about you, he smiled. But behind that smile was something else. Something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't fake. It was hollow. As if every expression had been carefully rehearsed. Throughout the dinner, I didn't speak much. I just observed. Ethan knew exactly how to guide the conversation. He laughed at the right moments, held eye contact when he needed to seem sincere, tilted his head while listening, gently touched Jessica's hand when she said something sweet. He was flawless, almost too flawless. But my feelings didn't come from what I saw. They came from what was missing. A complete absence of emotional depth, as if the person behind those eyes was a sealed room without windows. After the meal, when everyone was getting ready to leave, I stood on the porch watching Ethan's car lights disappear behind the fence. Jessica walked up beside me, arms crossed. You were going to say something, weren't you? I turned to her. What do you mean? You were planning to say something about Ethan, weren't you? I saw the way you looked at him. You're always suspicious. I was quiet for a moment. I just want you to be careful. Jessica exhaled, gave a soft scoff. There it is again. You're not happy that I found someone, right? Because you have no one, it bothers you when others do. I was going to say something, but I didn't. There was no space for reason in her eyes. I just nodded. If you're happy, then I have no objection. Jessica stared at me for a while. Just don't ruin this. I know you like being the quiet hero, but this is real life, not one of your little games. She turned and walked back inside. I stayed where I was, hand tightening on the wooden railing. The night wind brushed against my collar, a chill creeping down my spine. I'd felt that chill before. During a meeting with Caroline, when we worked with a client who had manipulated the emotions of an entire company to force them to resign voluntarily, just to cut layoff costs. That man had a warm smile too, spoke softly, gently, but inside there was a void. A place with no light. I felt that again. Ethan. I didn't know the truth. I had no evidence. But I had a feeling. And my instincts had never failed me. I decided I would attend the wedding. Not to ruin it, but to listen. And, if necessary, to speak. But only at the right moment. When no one else could stop what was coming. The wedding was held at a high-end hotel downtown, where even the crystal lights seemed to glow with a kind of showy extravagance and the weight of wealth's expectations. I arrived on time wearing a classic blue dress, not flashy but neat. I came alone. No gift box, no envelope, no companion. The receptionist looked me over and offered a stiff smile. Sorry, may I have your name? Allison Carter. She scanned the list for a moment, then frowned. I'm sorry, I don't see your name on the guest list. Maybe there's been a mix-up. I wasn't surprised. I looked around and noticed a few people behind me had started whispering. I just nodded politely. It's fine. I'm the bride's sister. The woman looked confused, but after a bit of back and forth with the event team, she pointed to a small table near the window, close to the kitchen entrance. The table had clearly been added last minute. Wrinkled tablecloth, no name card, no flowers, no menu. I walked over and sat down on a chair whose backrest was slightly loose. The other people at the table were hotel staff, housekeepers, a few lighting technicians. Everyone looked at me like they couldn't figure out why I was there. I sat still, hands on my lap, gazing out at the stretch of lawn. Behind me, soft music started playing and guests began entering the main hall. About 15 minutes later, Jessica stepped out from the dressing room. She wore a form-fitting wedding gown, hair in a high bun, a sheer veil trailing behind her. Under the golden lights, she looked like a Hollywood star stepping out of a movie. She walked past my table and paused. Without looking at me directly, she leaned slightly and whispered near my ear, still smiling like she was complimenting a guest. "You really showed up? No gift, no seat, no face. Yet here you are." I turned my head toward her. My eyes weren't angry nor pleading, just quiet enough to make her hesitate for a second. But Jessica quickly straightened, waved at a group of guests, and moved on like nothing happened. The dinner began after the formal ceremony. Each table was served sparkling wine, soup, salad, then the main course. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. No one brought anything to my table. Not even a glass of water. A server passed by and I asked softly, "Excuse me, may I have a glass of water?" He looked at me, hesitated, then said, I'm not sure you're on the service list. Let me check." Not long after, my mother walked over to the table, forcing a smile. "Don't blame anyone, sweetheart. They just have so many guests, you understand." I didn't answer. I just looked at her, then turned away. Right then, I heard the sound of a chair scraping behind me. I turned and saw my father sitting across the table, one leg crossed over the other, looking at me with exhaustion. "Why are you here? Jessica didn't invite you. Your mother said to include you out of courtesy, but no one thought you'd actually show up." I pressed my lips together. "I came because I thought it was an important day for my sister." He shrugged. "Then go home. Why are you sitting here? It's embarrassing." I stood up. Slowly, without rush. Without anger. Without a word. I stepped into the aisle. The entire hall went quiet at the sound of my heels on the wooden floor. I could feel every eye turning toward me. A woman standing alone in the middle of a celebration, no wine, no gift, no smile. Just a few steps from the main doors, a deep male voice called out from the VIP table near the stage. "Wait, are you Allison Carter?" I stopped. Turned around. A man with salt and pepper hair, wearing a dark blue suit, stood up from the table. His eyes locked on mine. "You're the one who sent me that anonymous report last March, when Jackson Reed was on the brink of collapse?" I nodded slowly. "Yes. That was me." He looked around, then stepped into the center of the hall. "You saved nearly 500 jobs. You sent me an analysis that even my own legal department couldn't come up with. I once called you at 2 in the morning, remember? You said one sentence that kept me wide awake all night. When everyone goes quiet, that's when emotions explode the loudest. That line is what made me stay. And we survived." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Guests at the VIP tables began whispering. A middle-aged woman wearing a badge from the National Chamber of Commerce called out, "Gray Fox? You were behind Armand Group's crisis consulting this past spring." I didn't answer. I just tilted my head slightly. Another man from a corner table, who I recognized as the CEO of a regional bank chain in Northern California, nodded repeatedly. "I've worked with you over email. Can't believe I'm finally seeing you in person." Jessica stood frozen on stage. Ethan glanced at me, unreadable. My mother's mouth fell open. My father sat silently, as if a gust of wind had just struck him in the face. I remained in the center of the room, saying nothing, no longer leaving. And for the first time, the lights didn't just shine on the bride. They shined directly on me, not because I sought them, but because the truth can't be buried forever. A soft sound echoed from the back row. A chair slid, its legs scraping lightly against the wood floor. A strange noise in the thick silence. Everyone turned. A man in his 30s stood up. Dark suit, black tie, a face composed with cold seriousness. He walked forward slowly, eyes locked on the stage where Jessica and Ethan stood stunned. "My name is Thomas Ward," he said, his voice deep and steady as stone. "I'm Ethan's half-brother." The room trembled with gasps and stares. Ethan stiffened. Jessica furrowed her brows, lips parted like she wanted to speak but couldn't. "I didn't come here to ruin today," Thomas continued. "But I can't stand by while my family, even just part of it, continues deceiving people the way they've done before." He paused, then turned his gaze toward my parents and finally toward Jessica. "Ethan is not the successor of Ward Global. He was removed from the board over a year ago for embezzling nearly $2 million from an internal investment fund. The matter was handled quietly to protect the firm's reputation. But the internal reports and evidence are fully documented. Ethan clenched his jaw. Thomas, you don't have the right. I have every right when you keep using our family's name to deceive, Thomas cut in firmly. You lied to her, he pointed at Jessica, about your background, your position, and your entire financial history. The room felt like thick fog. Some guests began discreetly standing, pulling out their phones to record. Thomas stepped forward again, pulling a stack of papers from his jacket and holding them up. These are unsecured loan contracts under Jessica Carter's name. The total amount is $600,000, approved at a preferred corporate rate because Ethan signed as a guarantor, falsely claiming to be the acting CEO of Ward Global. Every signature, every document, completely forged. Jessica froze. Her face went pale like the blood had drained from her. She took a step back, staring at Ethan like she was seeing a stranger. You told me the loan was to invest in the condo. I thought I was signing for joint ownership, she stammered. $600,000? Ethan gave a nervous laugh, lifting his hand as if to calm her. I was going to tell you. This was our plan, babe. That property's going to spike in value. You have to trust me. Trust. Jessica's voice cracked. You tricked me into signing fraudulent loan papers? You said your dad was a major shareholder. I signed thinking I was marrying into a powerful family. Thomas spoke again, cutting through the air. My father, Ethan's father, cut ties with him 2 years ago. He has no involvement in any financial deals. Ethan's only been using the Ward name as a front. And his parents, those two sitting over there, they're not elite. They're hundreds of thousands in debt over 3 civil lawsuits and unpaid taxes. My mother leaned back in shock, eyes wide. My father gripped the chair arm, sweat glistening on his brow. The room descended into chaos. Some guests stood up, whispering, others pulled off their name tags and left. I remained still, one hand resting on the back of a chair, watching everything unravel like a stage play with no intermission. Jessica collapsed to her knees, hands gripping her head, shoulders trembling violently. No, this can't be real, she whispered. That number, that contract. Mom, did I really sign it? My mother rushed over, dropping beside her daughter in tears. Jessica, I had no idea. Thought he was a good man. I thought you found someone who'd love you. Ethan snapped. I didn't lie. Everyone just assumed. I loved Jessica for real. Thomas stepped closer, voice low but resolute. Real love doesn't need forged papers. Real love doesn't saddle the woman you claim to adore with fake debts. You don't love anyone but yourself, Ethan. At that moment, another man stood from the guest of honor table. Silver hair, neatly styled, tall frame, sharp-tailored suit. His voice rang out clearly, slicing through the tension. Forgive the interruption. I'm Frederick Hall, CEO of Green Core Energy. He turned to Jessica. Allison Carter helped my company survive a major staffing crisis last year. She never asked for credit, never sought public praise. But without her, hundreds of my employees would have lost their livelihoods. Then he turned to Ethan. I've seen your name in a private internal investigation. Seen you here now. I genuinely feel sorry for this young woman. Jessica lifted her head, her tears mixing with smudged makeup. You knew all along, didn't you? I stepped forward slowly, crouching to look her directly in the eyes. I didn't know, I said gently, firmly. I sensed it. I tried to tell you. But all you saw in me was a shadow of negativity. You never stopped to listen. Jessica broke down completely, collapsing into our mother's arms, while I turned and walked back to my seat. But I no longer needed to sit. The truth had spoken. I didn't have to say anything else. It wasn't revenge. It was revelation. And no one could avoid it now. I stood in the center of the hall, the lights from the high ceiling still pouring down like I was the keynote speaker at a global summit, not the uninvited guest they dismissed at the beginning. No one interrupted me. Not a single whisper cut through the silence. Even the sound of breathing felt held in. Jessica buried her face into our mother's shoulder, her face a ruin of tears and smeared makeup. Ethan had disappeared from the hall, likely chasing after his parents to escape the storm he had created. Guests were standing up, removing name tags, some slipping out of the room without a word. I looked around, letting my gaze linger on every face that had once so easily turned away from me. Then I spoke, not loudly but clear and unwavering, like a floodgate opened after years of pressure. I've stood behind rescue plans that saved companies from bankruptcy. I've helped businesses uncover the real reasons their people were leaving. I've pointed out strategic flaws their own executives wouldn't dare face. I've saved many companies, but I couldn't save a family that never learned how to value what they already had. I paused. Still no one interrupted. I didn't come here to expose anyone. I didn't come to prove anything either. I came because I used to believe that, even when treated like an afterthought, I should still show up on my little sister's big day. But maybe the only thing I really need to do today is say this loud and clear. From this moment on, I officially remove my name from what you all call the Carter family. It was like someone had punched my father straight in the chest. My mother lifted her tear-streaked face, stunned and stricken. Allison, what are you saying? You're abandoning your mother? You can't, not after all these years. After all these years, Mom? I replied, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. After all these years of silence when Jessica called me a curse? After all these years of pretending not to see I was the only one paying for the roof repairs, the electric bills, your medications? Or after all those years you just sat there while Dad said I was the bad luck dragging this whole family down, and you just lowered your head? My mother opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came out. My father clenched his fists, then let them fall limp, like a man who'd just lost his sense of direction. I turned to Jessica. She stared at me, dazed, like in just a few short hours her entire world had collapsed and there was nothing left to hold on to. I used to hope one day you'd see me not as someone jealous of you, but as the person who understood you best. But you didn't need someone to understand you. You needed someone to stay quiet so you could shine, even if that light was fire burning you to ash. I won't be your shield anymore. Jessica burst into sobs, reaching out like she was trying to stop me. I'm sorry. I didn't know it would come to this. I didn't nod. I didn't shake my head. I simply slid my hand from her loose grasp. It's too late to say sorry for what's been done over and over for a lifetime. As I stepped out from the rows of chairs, the sound of my heels echoed again, just like in the beginning, but it wasn't met with silence. It was met with respect. Suddenly, a tall, lean man with silver hair in a slate blue shirt stood up from the front guest row. He picked up the microphone and turned to the hall. My name is Victor Hale, CEO of Northbridge Capital. I just want to say one simple thing. Every eye turned to him. Allison Carter is the one who designed the entire restructuring strategy when we merged 3 branches in the Northeast earlier this year. Thanks to her emotional analysis, we avoided a full-scale company-wide strike. Because of her, nearly 400 employees kept their jobs. He looked at Jessica, then at my mother, then turned to me, his gaze slow, firm, and deliberate. If it hadn't been for Ms. Carter, we would have collapsed. That's the truth. And it's a shame that the very people in her own family had no idea. The applause started out scattered, then grew. Some guests stood. A few nodded over and over. Someone wiped away tears. Not from pity, but because they understood. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't forgiveness. It's finding the courage to walk away from the place you once called home and finally live according to your own worth. Jessica remained seated, clutching the edge of her chair, her eyes empty. My mother slumped against my father's shoulder, still crying. I walked out of the hall. No one stopped me. No one called after me. No blame. No pleading. I heard only one thing within myself, a strange quiet. As if after all these years, I had finally stepped out of that dark house and gently closed the door behind me, with no anger, no bitterness, no regret. San Diego welcomed me with a soft morning breeze, the scent of sea salt and palm resin drifting through the window of my newly leased office. I stood in the empty room, sunlight streaming through the thin white curtains, casting shadows of the window pane onto the pale wood floor. No furniture. No logo. No desk chairs. Just open, peaceful space, for me to begin again from myself. It took me 3 days to set everything up. An oak desk. 2 bookcases. A small ash gray sofa set. A vintage floor lamp I found at a second-hand shop on the corner. I didn't put a nameplate on the door, just a simple white sheet that read, Strategic Consulting, by appointment only. My first client at this office was someone I had coached remotely during a post-merger crisis in Arizona. When he stepped in, he stood silent for a few seconds, looked around, then said, "I thought your office would be more flashy." I smiled. I prefer real light over stage lights. Less than 6 months later, my little office was nearly booked every week. Those who had once worked with me under the alias Gray Fox began to meet the real me. No nickname, no disguise. CEOs, HR directors, project leads, they didn't just come for strategy. They came looking for a way forward through burnout, fractured teams, broken trust. I still use the same methods Caroline once taught me. Watch how they opened the door, how they sat down, how they avoided one question but repeated another. Everything told a story. And my job was to listen and help them hear their own voice again, the one they had long stopped recognizing. One early autumn afternoon, Caroline came to visit. She walked in wearing a plum-colored wool scarf, round glasses perched low on her nose. I made her a cup of chamomile tea and we sat together by the open window, watching the small street outside where leaves had started to turn golden. "Are you making a living from this?" she asked, her eyes warm and wise. I nodded. "Not just making a living. For the first time I feel enough." Caroline chuckled softly, touching my shoulder. "Then I think it's time for the teacher to retire." I looked at her, surprised. "Caroline." "No, listen closely," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "I've walked far enough. Now I need to step back, read, garden, and let someone else carry the light forward. I want you to take over my VIP client network. They trust me, but they'll trust you if you step out using your own name." It took me a whole week to consider her offer. Not because I doubted myself, but because I understood the weight of being the anchor for people with so much to lose. But by the end of the week, I called Caroline and said just one sentence. "I'm not replacing you. I'm continuing you." In those early months, Thomas Ward began sending me short emails. Sometimes a business article related to leadership psychology, sometimes just a few lines asking how I was doing. At first, I thought it was just courtesy. But then the messages became more frequent. One day, he wrote, "If you have time, I'd like to take you to dinner. Not for work. Just because. I owe you a thank you." I said yes. That dinner took place at a small seaside restaurant. No bright lights, no flashy menu. We talked about childhood, how Thomas had been forced to compete with Ethan even when he didn't want to. He told me about his birth mother who passed away early, about living with a father who only saw value in money and status. "You're nothing like Ethan," I said after listening. Thomas nodded. "And you're nothing like anyone I've ever met." After that night, we stayed in touch. Nothing rushed. But one thing was clear. When two people who have been hurt know how to listen to each other, there's no need to fight for space. There's only the desire to keep each other standing. A year later, I was invited as the keynote speaker at the National Corporate Strategy Conference in San Francisco. The auditorium held over 500 people. Spotlights beamed onto the stage. I stood there in a navy blue suit, microphone in hand, waiting for the moderator to introduce me. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice booming through the speakers, "some people were once called dreamers, pushed aside because they didn't fit the mold. But today she's the one charting the survival path for major corporations, the one who turned high-risk mergers into success stories. Please welcome Miss Allison Carter." I walked onto the stage, the lights on my face but not blinding. Because this time I wasn't squinting to guess what others thought of me. I knew exactly who I was, what I was doing, and why. In the front row, I saw Caroline quietly smiling and Thomas tilting his head slightly, eyes saying, "Keep going, I'm here." I was no longer in the shadows. I was stepping into the light, with the same feet that had once walked through so many cold places. And this time I carried no fear behind me. What do you think of my journey? Of a girl once called a burden, a quiet shadow on the sidelines of someone else's happiness, yet in the end became the only one who stayed clear-headed among all the glitter and pretense? Have you ever experienced what it feels like to be dismissed by your own family, looked down upon just because you didn't live the way they wanted? I believe everyone has their own worth. Sometimes we have to walk far away from the things most familiar to us to find our own light. Not everyone is born into understanding, but everyone has the right to choose how they move forward, with dignity, calm, and the belief that they deserve more. If this story stirred something in you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I'd truly love to hear your perspective. And if you want to keep exploring raw, emotional stories about family, choices, and resilience, hit subscribe. Because behind every closed door, there's always a journey worth telling. And the stories to come, I promise, you won't want to miss.